all, and welcome to another thrilling episode of Off the Dome. I'm your humble interviewer, Jordan Brown, and with me for the very first time is our superb storyteller. Say hi, superb storyteller.
Hello, heroes. It's James D'Amato.
James, thank you so much. This is so exciting. I've been such a big fan of yours. The word isn't unintentionally, but before we started recording, I was like, I have to find the multiple books of yours that I own so that I can prove that I own them and that I'm not a liar. And then I can't find them because they're my office everywhere off screen is just piles of things. And I was like, it's in one of these piles and I don't know which.
I occupy an interesting niche within the TTRPG space. I'm a bit of a cryptid creator. Did I write books? Are they out there? They could be in your house right now. That's actually a really funny thing about the books. For the longest time, my most notable work was my podcasts, because I've, at this point been doing them 10 years. And there was a really good stretch where it was my primary source of income. And I just sort of got used to, well, if people know me, they know me through the podcast. And after I started doing the books have a really wide distribution. I published with Adams Media, which is an imprint of Simon & Schuster. So they put books everywhere. And there are a lot of people who don't know who I am, but have my books on their shelves. There are some people who do know who I am, but don't know that I am the person that wrote those books. So it's very weird where people have interacted with my work, but don't know that it is mine.
Yeah, I was just rambling about how much I love your books and how impactful they have been in my home games. And that's not really a question, but
I appreciate it. I deeply, deeply appreciate it. Yeah. These books have been so much fun to write. They are a little bit of a different approach than I feel like you normally see. I think it's really popular and for understandable reasons for a lot of backstory and other books to be just a bunch of random tables with interesting tidbits on them. And I wanted to take more of a game design approach that I had learned in a lot of the indie and story games that I had been playing to put really, thought-provoking questions in front of players, to construct exercises that felt more like character creation tools that you might see in a Powered by the Apocalypse game or something like that, so that people who are playing other games, more popular fantasy games like Pathfinder, like Dungeons and Dragons, would be able to benefit from that narrative technology, just in a more concise form. And I think the people who've picked it up have really responded to it, which I think is so lovely, because I love watching people be creative, and I've had so much fun playing all of these different games across my career that it makes me happy when I see people have fun with those tools that normally you kind of have to have the courage or whatever to step up to an entirely new role-playing system to experience and then go, oh, there are other ways to do this. So yeah, that has been so much fun with these.
Yeah, I'm also super curious. I have a million questions for you. Look, we should jump into the important one because people will watch maybe 10 minutes of this video. So we should talk about Oh Captain, My Captain right out the gate, even though I do want to ask you about kobold advocacy. But we can get to that in a second.
Sure, yeah.
Talk to me about Oh Captain, My Captain.
Oh Captain, My Captain is a Descended from the Queen RPG. It is what my publisher has decided to call a quick play RPG. So it's a game that you can play, with a standard amount of players in about an hour or less, but you play a full round, tell a complete story. It is the first standalone role-playing game that has been put out by a major 5 publisher. And I say major 5, it's really just 2 right now. It's Simon & Schuster and Penguin Random House and all of the other things that Penguin Random House has gobbled up. But it is the first to come out as, just its own system. They did publish RPG game previously that was also a title that I edited. I feel very fortunate to be in the position to do this, because one of the things that means is if this product is successful, they will be looking to other game designers to make more games like this, and hopefully get role-playing games in places with better distribution, because right now you pretty much only see Dungeons and Dragons, maybe Pathfinder, and I know I have seen in Target the Avatar Legends that Magpie puts out, but like all of that is very specific. And I think if there is more of a major publisher push, you will just see these games in more places.
Yeah, I have a dear friend of mine who's a librarian, and I'm making my mental note to like text her immediately after this is over and be like, "Hey, a book you should add to the library that you should request for the library from a major publisher," which will help be an easier sell to the Austin library system.
Well, it is a card-based product, which I know library systems tend to struggle with, but I definitely hope that they pick it up, because I absolutely adore libraries, and I love when my books and various products end up in libraries. But yeah, it's a card-based RPG about the idea of heroism and hero worship. Basically, it tells the story of people who follow, who are a part of a crew underneath a legendary captain. That ship has fallen on hard times. There are some members of the crew who are whispering of mutiny, but the captain has emerged with a plan that should turn everything around. And they've selected a small amount of the crew to be part of a landing party to go on a very dangerous journey with them. And that, of course, is all of our player characters. And as you play, you pull cards that reveal more about who the captain is, who you are, and what your relationship is like, all leading up to actually four different possible endings, depending on how you play, that determine the overall story of the game. Super fun design experience. It plays very quickly. And one of the reasons that I decided to go with Descended from the Queen, that is obviously based on Alex Roberts' For the Queen, which I think is one of the most brilliant RPGs out there, because I think it is so accessible. It is a game that literally teaches itself. As you sit down, you read the rule cards aloud. It takes 5 minutes, and by the time you get to the end of that, everybody knows how to play the game. Everybody knows every rule of the game, and they can jump right in. It is the perfect game to convince somebody to role play for the first time. It's not like D&D or Pathfinder where you're like, well, we have to sit down and make a character for 4 hours, and then you've got to sit down for another 4 hours and actually play this game full of math.
Yeah.
Um, so
And
yeah,
who knows if that will be the end or not.
yeah, exactly, exactly. So it is, designed to expand the possibilities for role playing, not just within the audience that it reaches, but within the market in general. And also, I think a really fun and thoughtful game that I worked
Amazing.
very hard to get out there.
Oh, it's so great. Yeah. It's one of those things. I have a 3-year-old, and so like the amount, like every day, I'm like, oh, but I want to play more games. And I was like, how do I get more time? That's what I need. I need infinite time to play infinite games, and
Yeah.
but I'm always so excited when there's something that's like, hey, here's something that you could pick up and play and be done, not be done, but like you could experience a game in an afternoon, whatever, as opposed to the, all right, 4 hours later, you've got a character. You don't really know all the actions you can do because there are a billion of them.
Yeah.
But like, yeah, I'm
Well, and
always
then
so
there's also
grateful
the
for,
the GM phase where you are sitting
yes.
and researching and learning how to play the game for everybody else too. So that's, another like 10 hours or whatnot, which is so much more possible without a toddler running around.
Yeah. Yeah. It's also one of the things that I really like love about like obviously one of the podcasts one of the podcasts that you're a part of, the One Shot Network. I mean, well, One Shot Network is the whole brand. Anyway, One Shots, I appreciate because I also have no time for podcasts because I work from home, so I
Sure.
don't. I lost my driving time. So like podcast time is super limited for me. And I'm always appreciative when there, look, I love Critical Role. Don't come at me, but you throw a 5 hour episode my way, that's going to take me like a week and a half to get through if I don't have anything else going on.
You know, the thing I'll say about Critical Role is there are a lot of enthusiastic upstarts. I really think that show is going places. We started probably, I want to say, 2 months before Critical Role over on One Shot. So like we've been watching them the whole time, and it is marvelous to see their success. But like, yeah, it is a lot of one game that you're seeing there. I think obviously that's going to be changing now that Daggerheart is coming out. I'm pretty sure they're going to make that shift very soon. But on One Shot, we wanted to do something philosophically very different, because when I was starting it, even though we were in a pre-Critical Role era, there were still a lot of actual play options out there. Some of them were podcasts, some of them were like YouTube videos and whatnot, but most people at that time were weirdly playing Pathfinder's Rise of the Rune Lords campaign. I don't know
how
what it was, but
strange.
I would say a solid half of what I found when I was like sort of looking around at the market to make the show was Rise of the Rune Lords, and everything else was Dungeons and Dragons 3.5. There were maybe one or two shows that were fourth, which was the primary edition at the time. And I was like, in college, I had this experience where I got to play so many more games and learn about what RPGs could be, because like you start at Dungeons and Dragons and it feels amazing. If it's the first role-playing game that you've played, it is like, wow, anything is possible. This is so open and cool. But seeing how different game mechanics can impact your experience is truly mind-blowing. I was kind of like beaten and harangued into playing other games for the first time, and I eventually did it. And each one felt like a revelation to me. My second game after D&D 3.5 was Shadowrun, which felt like a breath of fresh air, which is so funny because it's such a wild game and so mechanically clunky and whatnot. But the fact that you didn't build a character based on class, that you like built it out of building blocks, I was like, wow, there's so much customization possibility. And then after that, I played Feng Shui, Robin Laws's martial arts game, and the mechanics in that were narratively focused. One of my favorites being there is a karate cop ability that is improvised weapons that gives you a bonus for using an improvised weapon the first time you use it. And you know, you think like, what does that do? That incentivizes you to play like you are Jackie Chan, to constantly move through a scene and pick up new objects, use them as a weapon once, and then move on. It's something that influences play in a direction that empowers creativity, that inspires creativity. And that, like, to me, spoke to this is the power that sits at the core of these different design systems. And ultimately, with One Shot, what I decided what I wanted to do was show that off, was create a show where we played as many of these games as possible, and make that a feature so that people had more opportunity to see how games like this work. Because as we've said, it's a bigger decision to, you know, decide I actually want to try a game, to sit down to play, to find it at a convention. You know, you are working harder. But if you just load up a podcast episode, you can see what the game is like before you make that commitment. And that's kind of been our strategy or theory over on One Shot. And, you know, I did that for about 10 years, and I recently passed on the mantle of host to Dylan Appelian.
Oh, Super
And
Dylan, so good, so talented.
he's incredible.
Yeah.
And the show is still going, still exploring new games with fresh casts and whatnot. I am so proud of it, and it's something that like I think really should be out there, because there are so many wonderful games that are hard to discover right now. Or even if you discover them, like it's a question of like, is this the thing that I really want to devote this precious amount of time that I have to? And the show can help answer those questions while entertaining you at the same time.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we met at Gen Con, or at least someone handed me your card at Gen Con. I was just
Wow.
everything is such a blur from that
Sure,
weekend, and
sure.
when I
Yeah.
was just sorting through the like stack of business cards I have, and I was like, oh, I know I should email this. I should email James. This is an interview I definitely want to do. But yeah, like walking around Gen Con, I was like, I don't understand how anyone figures out what game to play here. Like role playing, board, otherwise. Like there are 50 billion options here, just here. I was like, I don't get it. So yeah, I'm so appreciative of like a podcast that's like, hey, we're gonna explore different game systems so that you can get a vibe for like, is this what I want at my table? It works, I think, really, really well. Um, I'm also curious, like you talked about how you started this 10 years ago. We've seen such a huge increase in popularity in those last 10 years, and especially in the last couple of years, it feels like. Do you have an idea of like where that's coming from? Is it something that like obviously like it's beneficial for everyone because but like how has this become so mainstream so quickly?
I mean, I would credit a lot of it to things like Critical Role and Dimension 20. I think the being those highly visible brands within the space, it is just the actual play is doing a lot to help more people experience it before they ever, pick up a set of dice. There are plenty of people in the D20 and Critical Role audience who watch, are avid fans of this thing, but either never get the chance to play at home or have never played at home. And that's huge. There are also a lot of tools that make playing more accessible. I think about things like Roll20. Roll20 has those looking for game forums. You can decide in the morning that you want to play a role-playing game for the first time, and then in the evening you can be in your first game. There's also what are those professional GMing services? I cannot remember the name of the
Start
company that
playing?
does them. Yeah. Start playing. So like you can, if you can't get it in LFG, you can force the issue and just hire someone to run the game for you. There are a lot of things that just make it easier. That, and I think there's just been an overall change in the stigma around things. We see more positive media representations and things like Stranger Things and whatnot of role playing. And I think nerdy things in general are just more popular these days, which means at the end of the day, somebody does not have to think about the things that I thought of before my first game, which was like, do I really want to make my life about this? It feels like this is a deep well that you could be going down. And what's down there? Is it a bunch of stinky nerds? And so, if it is just, well, this is a much more mainstream thing. I'm seeing all of these people playing, all of these, dazzling, charismatic celebrities playing these games. It just makes it a lot easier to approach it. And once you're here, there's so much wonderful stuff to discover.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that makes sense. Can I tell you my favorite Stranger Things story? I don't know if this is
Sure.
um, uh, I was
They
going
need the
to,
help.
yeah, they need the help. So I was going to a work retreat a couple of years ago, and someone like people knew that I was really into Dungeons and Dragons, and whatever season of Stranger Things had just come out, and people were coming up to me and they're like, "Hey, what do you know about Vecna?" And I was like, "My time has come." Like um, people who had never played knew nothing about
Entirely too
Dungeons and
much. Yeah.
Dragons.
What do you know about Vecna? Such a specific poll.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I was like, this is it. This is the greatest day of my life.
Yeah.
I get to shine at
It
work for,
finally matters.
yeah. But it's such a funny, like, it is so funny to see how much of it is bled into, like, people who, I mean, these were like people 50s and 60s coming up to me and they're like, "What's the deal with this Vecna guy?" And I'm like, "Well, let me tell you all about him."
Sure.
People who had never played but loved Stranger Things. Yeah,
That's great.
it feels very strange. To sort of similarly, like at I was at PAX West and I played Magic the Gathering for the first time in 25 years probably. And someone was sitting next to me and they played Fog and they started to explain it and I was like, if it's a card from the mid to late 90s, you do not have to explain it to me. I'm covered there. Everything after that, I don't know what they do, but like if it's a 90s card, I'm ready for Magic cards. Like I played so much of it in high school and then never again.
Sure.
But it is again so funny to see like how popular that game has suddenly resurged of like, oh, we're gonna make a Final Fantasy VII Commander deck. We're making Lord of the Rings. Like we're making all these things that are gonna get other nerds to come in and play also Magic the Gathering nerds, which also feels like then is just another like once they're there, they're like, oh, what other games can I play? Which obviously will hopefully lead them to Oh Captain, My Captain. I tied this all together.
Yeah, there we
Um,
go.
uh, um, Obviously, like I know we talked about Dylan, so incredibly talented. But obviously, like you ran a lot of one shots or multi shots, but like a brief chunk of a campaign for a long time.
500 episodes worth. Yeah.
That's so many. Yeah, I'm super curious, like your thoughts on one shots, generally speaking, like how long should they be? How do you not let them turn into a campaign or intentionally turn them into a campaign?
So it's definitely a system specific question for how long something should be. What I usually afford in terms of recording time is about 4 hours, expecting us to walk away with about three and maybe some change of audio that'll edit down into about 3 episodes. There have been 4-part series and whatnot on one shot, and those usually have around a 5 hour recording. But like 4 hours, I think, is a good sweet spot for most games with the level of abstraction they have. And for one shots, the thing that you're looking for is a ending point. That does not need to be the totality of character stories. It just needs to be a story that a character has gone through. I think I draw a lot of inspiration from comics for that, in that, when you read a run on Spider-Man, you're not getting, Peter Parker's origin to his death. You are getting like, well, this is one adventure that assumes a past and assumes a future for this character, but like this is one villain that he faced in the trials and tribulations that happened along that way. So when I'm structuring one shots, I'm typically looking at who are the characters that are here, and what is the world like, and what could this world say about these characters, what challenge could this world put in front of these characters, and we will turn that into, a fun emotional journey to peek in on.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. It's funny, I have a Spider-Man on my wall right there.
Mm,
I was like, is it visible? Not really.
it's kind of. I mean, now
You-
now that you've pointed it out, I can
You're
definitely
like,
see it.
I see red top and blue pants swinging
Hmm.
through, I think a crowd of protesters. I don't know. I don't remember what's happening in it. Our
You have like the one weird point in Spider-Man's career where he was like really mad at student protesters.
yeah. Our son is named Parker, so after Peter Parker, and so our house is littered with Spider-Man paraphernalia.
Of course.
As anytime like you get like that becomes a like crux of something. It's just the gifts that people then give you, which is great. I love Spider-Man. I love to have that as a thing, but just like here's a new Spider-Man thing. Like great, all right, I'll throw it on the wall.
Easy. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm also really curious. You mentioned that idea of like hitting an endpoint for a one shot. Thinking about that in terms of how much freedom you give your players versus how much you are trying to. Railroad's such a like misused term, but like how much you're trying to keep them moving towards a final point so that at 4 hours you're like, all right, we've done a thing.
Yeah, with how you respond to people, it's really deciding on what's the impact of this decision that this person has made. Like at the beginning of the game, you could just have a door in front of people and they open the door. And if for pacing early on in the game, they're probably going to find some information or see something intriguing that opens the world up for them. At the end of the game, there's probably going to be a threat or monster or calamity behind that door that will call for climactic action. So pacing is really more of a question of how dramatic and specific is the response that I am giving to my players, and what experience does that produce for them overall. So in pacing, like it is just there's a period of the game that is teasing out information, and then at about halfway through we're taking that information, we're putting it together in climactic moments. I think improv and my experience with improv, I'm in Chicago. I moved here originally to learn improv from the major schools out here. There is a very popular and well-known form of improv called the Herald. It is based on a normal 3-beat structure. Even if you've never done improv before, if you've watched an episode of Seinfeld, it mechanically functions in the same way, where you will have 3 different plots or tracks to a story: the A, the B, and the C. In the beginning, you are establishing what those are. In the middle, you are broadening the world of those things. And in the third beat, you are crossing over the world of those 3 beats and bringing them together in scenes and ideally building towards a climactic moment. You can certainly do that in a written thing like Seinfeld. In improv, it sometimes happens. You usually just find a good line to go out on. But in something like a role-playing game, like that can come down as like, well, we just need a, confrontation or scene that feels significant enough that it has resolved something.
Yeah.
Once you hit a transformation point, that's when the story's over. And as the GM, you have control over, like, people talk about railroading or fudging the rules or whatnot, but it's like, hey, if you want a one shot to be over, you declare when the monster is dead. Nobody knows that monster's hit points but you. So if you've come up at the end of your 4 hours and you want this thing to be over for some reason, hey, guess what? Your player hit it and it's dead. It's
Yeah.
over.
Turns out it was a real weak final boss.
Yeah.
Everything else was harder to get here. It was,
Yeah, it's
uh,
all based on how you reward player decisions,
yeah.
what the impacts are, because those are directly tied to the pacing of different beats in a story.
I think we taught. Yeah, we did it. We did. I think great news. We got to the end of that question. So
Nailed it,
an easy
nailed it.
edit point. Um,
And you, as the host of a podcast, decide the impact of an answer to a question. Did it resolve everything that you were curious about? Well, if pacing demands, it did.
Now I just want to leave in the whole chunk where you're just sitting at your phone, and I'm panikedly running away. All right, we've put it off for so long. Kobold advocacy. Tell me about being the world's leading kobold advocate and what
So
that means.
kobolds occupy an interesting nothing place in fiction. In they have they're like a minion monster. First of all, they are the thing that you kill before the important thing, and there are a lot of different minion creatures that can fill this role. You've got your goblins, your zombies, or whatever, and kobolds have been pulled so far from their mythological origin that it's really hard to say that they represent anything at all, because they represent 5 different things. You've got the mythology origins for kobolds. They are essentially no different than brownies. They are like little spirits or gnome type creatures that might play pranks, but even kobolds are like brownies. Like, well, they'll actually, if you leave out little treats for them, they'll probably do you little favors and whatnot. But you pull them into Dungeons and Dragons, and that's not an interesting thing to exist within a world of Dungeons and Dragons where you're supposed to kill things and take their stuff. So we gotta dress it up a little bit, and it's like a goblin type creature. And JRPGs, which are of course very inspired by D&D and the tabletop RPGs that came out of the United States and got translated, took that and were like, well, what if they were these little dog creatures with like axes and whatnot? So you've got that offshoot of kobolds. And eventually D&D, I think entering the 3.0 era, was like, we should make kobolds feel more distinct, more thematically tied to something. So we're going to make them dragons. And that's kind of the offshoot that they've had. And I really like, out of all the different possibilities for kobolds, I like draconic kobolds the most because to me, it is the most pathetic creature. Uh, it is something that takes the power and majesty of a dragon and distills it into something that's designed to be defeated and die. There is a lovely supplement, I think called Races of the Dragon back in D&D 3.5 that points out that the natural lifespan of a kobold is 120 years old, but the life expectancy of a kobold is about maybe 35. And that's not based on an infant mortality rate. That is literally about as high as you can hope because you get cut down by adventurers. So you have these fully realized creatures that are like very small and like kind of little bastards. They're like they've got the personality of cats, but they don't look attractive. They're just like horrible lizards, and they could live so long, but because they've devoted themselves slavishly to like an overlord, like they don't. And I just think there's something so beautiful in how weird and pathetic that is, that I love playing around with it in games. I do a lot of like world building stuff around kobolds because I find them so fascinating.
I love that so much. You also, I mean, you do a lot of general world building as well. You are, although you stepped away from hosting the one shots, you have Skyjacks,
Mhm.
and I know a lot of that world building came from the music of the Decemberists. I'm fascinated by that. Please tell me more.
So yeah, first of all, I'm a big fan of the Decemberists. I'm not much of a music listener, but I do absolutely adore the Decemberists. And around the time that I was looking for a new thing for us to do with our campaign podcast, because we had just wrapped up the Star Wars campaign that we had been doing for like 4 years. My players at the time, Johnny and JPC, came to me and they're like, all we know that we want to do is Sky Pirates. And so
Like
I had to
everyone
think,
does.
I had to think about like, okay, what does that mean to me? And a lot of it was like reading steampunk to me, which I don't love as much as a genre. So it's like, how do I do Sky Pirates and divorce myself from that? And coincidentally, earlier that year, my dear friend Keith Baker had showed me a preview of a game that he was working on in collaboration with the Decemberists. And this game's called Illimat. It is out now. It is a lovely, lovely game. Basically, it is a traditional card game that is using a repurposed piece of album art that came out from Hazards of Love. Essentially, the Decemberists, who are big board and role playing game enthusiasts, came to Baker and were like, we have this board. We took photos of an album of us playing a game around it. Can you make that game? And Keith, being a madman, goes, yes, of course. So together they make this game that is very, very informed by Hazards of Love, is using a lot of the imagery and characters of the album to make this beautiful traditional playing card game that also looks a little spooky, a little haunted. It looks like a card game got mixed up with a Ouija. So it just had all of these really compelling visuals to it. And I was thinking about like, okay, what do I associate with pirates that actually interests me? And I will point out, to make the record label that holds the leash of the Decemberists happy. I do not think of the Decemberists as a pirate band. However, I do associate a lot of their music with maritime stuff. I mean, there's the Mariner Revenge song, but there are so many other songs in their catalog that are related to sad sailors living sad lives and dying tragic deaths and whatnot. And so that I found really compelling. And I was like, okay, what if I took these images that were put into Illimat and I decided that this game, Illimat, is the most important game in the world, that deeply, deeply informs everything about the world around it. What would that world look like? Because I imagine the result of that world would be a place where people could be sky pirates. And we had a couple other goals. We wanted it to be kind of an anti-colonial narrative. We wanted an anti-capitalist narrative. And it turns out in the history of piracy, weirdly, because it is so tied to colonialism and it is a response to colonialism and kind of what it makes you do in certain ways, that like it was perfect for talking about that, the way colonialism creates its own outsiders and outcasts and how they struggle to survive within this system that like they were at one point propping up and helping to support. So it was a great way to like talk about all of these different themes in this world, like you said, informed by the Decemberists, which love to play with folk tales. So we not only got to talk about like all of the things that actually happen across the Decemberist discography, but we got to pick up on the folk tales that they were playing with and look at things behind that. So the result of Skyjacks, it's this world that I call folktale punk, where we are really, really looking at the vibe of a folktale story like The Crane Wife and going, in that world, what does the rest of that world look like? How do you make magic that feels like the magic of that world? So, you know, the magic in Skyjacks is very much not people hurling fireballs and casting lightning bolts at each other. It is, you know, mixing some blood and some dirt and burying it underground to like curse someone or whatnot. And it has been so much fun to build out that world, and I'm really proud of the way that world has turned out. I think some of the best world building I've done in my career has been tied to that world and setting, and I'm really, really proud of the results. Like not just in terms of world building, but in terms of the narrative that we've created around those characters.
Yeah. So obviously you've done a ton of world building. Is there like a common starting point for you in terms of like, we shouldn't say commons, a often starting point? You've built so many worlds that I'm assuming that it often becomes system specific in terms of some games. But yeah, is there something that like jumps out at you that like is an often starting point for you?
It is, I would say interest and passion, you know, are really the starting point for anything in any world building conversation. I now do a show on the network called the Ultimate RPG Podcast, where we actually use exercises from my books to world build and create characters with different guests. And when I have somebody come on a guest, there is a sign up sheet. And one of the things that I ask them is, you know, what are you promoting right now? And are there any genres that interest you right now? And those are my starting points. I'm thinking of like, okay, what does this person do? And how do I feature what it is they do? And what is drawing their attention right now? A recent guest I had the folks from Transplanar come on,
Hmm.
Connie and C. And they had on their listed genres like, well, we want something that is dark fantasy, coming from Connie, and then C was like, I really feel like I'm in my sci-fi era. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna find exercises across my books, and I'm gonna have you create your version of Warhammer 40K. I want to see the dark fantasy future that you create, and they used it to make this wonderful mecha anime about enlightenment and ascension, where you like literally carve a body for yourself and then put yourself in it, and it is this immortal warrior armor that you use to do battle, because battle is the ultimate expression of living. It was so wild. But really it's because I started the point of what interests you, because there is a way to ask you a question around that, to find those threads that you actually find compelling in here, and make those the most important things that we're going to look at, and build out from there and connect back when we can.
It also probably helps to have people like Connie and C, two of the most brilliant world builders alive.
I think they are both quite brilliant, and I will credit them, but I will not stand anywhere and say that you, dear listener, are not capable of similar brilliance. It is merely a question of opportunity and motivation. You all listening to the show have passions. You all have things that you are interested in. If you decided to highlight those in fiction, you would walk away with something interesting to say. That is kind of the theory behind all of my books. And yes, you can see a dazzling array of wonderful guests on the Ultimate RPG podcast and what they create. But all of those questions and exercises are things that, you know, you have access to. And if you use them, I think you will come away with something brilliant as well. There's no
Well,
idea that's more brilliant than the one that's on the table in front of you right now.
look, I can't top that. So, James, if people wanted to find the One Shot Podcast Network, if they wanted to find you around the internet, where can they find you and your brilliant work?
So if you want to find my brilliant work, you can head to any major brick and mortar bookstore, Barnes and Noble, Books a Million. My books should be on the shelves there. We're also at all major online retailers. So the Devil, Amazon will also have my stuff. That is where you'll be able to find Oh Captain, My Captain. If you're looking for that specifically, you can head to bit.ly/OCaptainRPG or bit.ly/MyCaptainRPG. And those will take you to online retailers. I, of course, say don't bother with the online retailers. Find your friendly local game store, call them up first, and be like, I would like these books, or I would like this game. And they will either tell you, hey, we've got that on the shelf right now, or we can special order that for you. It is always better to support a local place. So I strongly recommend that you do that.
Shout
If
out
you
to
want,
Outlaw Books and Outlaw Moon and Books. I don't know. Outlaw is the first word in Austin, Texas. Is my local game store that I usually shop at. So,
that's half a plug. That's
yeah,
partially a plug. They
you
owe
can
you
find it.
half a
It's
thank
next
you.
to Austin Books and Comics. It's around the corner. It's they owned by the same people.
Yeah, definitely. Like I strongly recommend doing things that way, because those stores are wonderful places of discovery, and we want to keep them around. So definitely support them where you can. If you want to find my podcasts, I right now host a bunch of different shows. I formerly hosted One Shot, which now Dylan hosts. You can find that by searching for One Shot or James D'Amato, still probably on any podcatcher. Um, I also host Campaign Skyjacks. There are two feeds. There is one feed called just Skyjacks. That is our startup feed. It's got about the first 26 episodes, where we cut out a bunch of the mid rolls to make it easier and quicker to power through. Then there is Campaign Skyjacks, which is attached to our much larger and longer running Campaign podcast. Campaign has been at this point running about 10 years. A good chunk of those years are our Star Wars show, which I think is also fantastic and you would enjoy. But starting at season 2 is Skyjacks. So if that was compelling to you, you can either start at the Skyjacks feed and then hop in to the main feed once you've caught up on the catch up feed, or you can, do the trouble of like searching for season 2 and hopping in with the first episode of Skyjacks. I think that show is incredible and rewarding. I know it sounds weird. That is part of the point. I strongly, strongly recommend it. I really don't think I have done stronger narrative work anywhere else. So you should check that out there. I also do a show called Star Wall, which is a space fantasy show that's like kind of about a food truck in a weird space fantasy setting. It's like a mashup of Two Broke Girls, Adventure Time, and The Bear. It's a really, really fun show. I highly recommend checking that out. And of course, the Ultimate RPG Podcast, which is an interview show about showing you some of your favorite creative people out there, mostly in the TTRPG space, and doing that by actually getting to watch them create. So half the show, I talk to them about their career, and the other half, we make something and you learn something about them that way. Finally, if you want to find me, the best place, sadly, is Twitter. You can find me at One Shot RPG there. I am on most other social media platforms at One Shot RPG. It's just Twitter and Blue Sky are really the ones that I'm most familiar with and easily accessible. So you can just, at me there. But please follow me anywhere you can. I would love to have you out there.
Amazing. James, thank you so much. And now I'm at a real loss because normally, as what started as not a bit and now is a bit, I say, I don't know how to end an interview, so I'm just going to hit stop recording. But we're recording on your Zoom, so I can't stop
Yes.
recording. So I don't
I
know how to end
hold
this
all
now.
the power now.
You've broken my interview streak of ending a recording with a
Well,
bit.
let me dig up some other plugs that I've got going, shall I? No, I will hit stop recording on my side here.